A billionaire CEO pulls over in the middle of a raging storm to help a poor pregnant woman on the roadside. He never expected it would change his entire life. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A fierce storm whipped across the desolate highway, rain slashing against the windshield like tiny arrows. In the driver's seat of a sleek black luxury car sat Gabriel Sorensen, billionaire CEO, recognized innovator, and a man whose life had been measured in market value rather than human connection. He was used to five-star hotels, private jets, and boardrooms that smelled of fresh linen and polished oak. But tonight, none of that mattered. On a lonely stretch of road far from city lights, with thunder rolling above, he was about to make a decision that would unravel everything he thought he knew about success and love. The wipers fought valiantly, clearing his view for split seconds before sheets of water blurred everything all over again. Gabriel squinted into the storm, trying to catch sight of the exit that would lead him to the exclusive lodge he owned in these parts, a getaway resort that only the elite could access. He was a man of scheduled perfection. Every second of his life was planned and profitable. Yet here he was, on a road trip he'd insisted on taking alone, wanting to clear his head after a high-stakes negotiation. In the back of his mind, he told himself it was simply efficient use of time. But deep down, perhaps he was escaping something else, the hollowness that sometimes accompanied his carefully curated life. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the roadway for an instant. That's when he saw it, a shape stumbling at the edge of the asphalt. At first, he thought it was just debris carried by the wind, until another flash of lightning revealed a person soaked to the bone. Gabriel felt his foot slam on the brake. He wasn't sure why. A man who measured risk by the millions would never normally stop in a storm for a stranger. But a tug in his chest, something rarely felt, made him pull over. The back tires skidded on the wet road as he came to a halt. Through the fogged driver's window, he could barely make out a silhouette. His hazard lights flicked on, painting the night with an orange pulse. Heart pounding, Gabriel lowered the window. Rain sprayed into the car. "Hey!" he shouted into the tempest. "Are you all right?" A timid voice responded, almost lost in the howling wind. "Please! Help!" Gabriel jumped out, ignoring the assault of raindrops. As he approached, he realized the figure was a young woman, her coat plastered to her body. Strands of her hair clung to her face, which was contorted with fear and exhaustion. She was hunched over, clutching at her abdomen in clear distress. "What happened? Are you hurt?" he asked, raising his voice over the thunder. Up close, he noticed that her lips were pale from cold. She shook her head, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. "I need to get to a hospital," she managed. "All right, come on." He gently guided her toward the passenger seat of his car. That's when he glimpsed something that made his heart skip a beat. She was clearly pregnant. A wave of alarm flared inside him. Gabriel Sorensen, the man who devoured business problems in a single breath, suddenly felt powerless. He'd never dealt with anything like this in all his years of living among corporate sharks. He helped her settle in, turned on the seat warmer, and handed her a towel from the back seat he'd thankfully stored for emergencies. Her hands trembled so violently that she could barely grip the towel. Water dripped onto the fine leather interior, something that might have irritated him under other circumstances, but right now he didn't care. He turned the heat up and shut the door behind him, then rushed to the driver's side, sliding in behind the wheel again. As he pulled back onto the road, a flash of lightning revealed her face in more detail. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her features etched with worry. For a moment, Gabriel wondered who she was. What had led her to be out here, on this remote stretch, in the middle of a storm? "My name is Gabriel," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's yours? Can you tell me how you're feeling?" She opened her mouth, but exhaustion had clearly taken hold. Finally, she whispered, "Sophie. My name is Sophie. My car broke down a mile away. I was trying to walk to find help. I can't afford an ambulance and I'm so scared." He felt a knot form in his stomach. The words triggered an avalanche of thoughts he couldn't immediately process. "Don't worry," he said, flipping on the GPS for the nearest hospital. Except the screen showed that the storm had severed some connections. He had no clear route. Thunder pounded overhead and the road was vanishing beneath puddles. At that instant, he remembered the lodge. It wasn't just a luxury retreat, it had some emergency facilities for guests, plus a caretaker who lived there. Perhaps they could at least keep Sophie warm until they located a proper medical center. He made a decision. "I'm going to take you to a place nearby. It's safe and will get you help." Sophie nodded, leaning her head back against the seat. "Thank you," she mumbled, her eyes fluttering with fatigue. As he drove, focusing on the winding path ahead, he risked a glance at her every so often. She cradled her belly, occasionally grimacing from pain or maybe from the cold. Questions swirled in his mind. Was her baby okay? Was she due soon? Why was she alone? But he didn't dare bombard her with queries. Instead, he turned the vents toward her and switched the radio off, letting her rest in silence. Another bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a rumble of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the car. The windscreen wipers danced frantically, but the deluge only grew heavier. Branches from the surrounding trees bent precariously, and Gabriel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He wasn't sure what was happening to him. His heart hammered in a way it hadn't in years, not even during the most nerve-wracking business acquisitions. About 20 minutes later, the imposing gates of the Sorensen Lodge came into view through the sheets of rain. Floodlights along the driveway flickered, powered by an industrial generator. Gabriel pressed the remote clipped to his visor, and the wrought iron gates swung open. Just as he guided the car into the driveway, a caretaker in a yellow raincoat rushed out, holding a flashlight. "Mr. Sorensen, we didn't expect—" "No time!" Gabriel cut him off, stepping into the storm once more to open Sophie's door. "She needs help. Call an ambulance or see if the roads are passable." The caretaker nodded and sprinted inside to find a phone or get a signal. Sophie stirred. Her eyes fluttered with alarm, though there was relief in them too, at the sight of shelter. "Where are we?" "One of my properties," Gabriel said quietly, slipping an arm around her as she tried to stand. "Don't worry. It's warm inside. Let's get you comfortable." Thunder boomed. The caretaker returned with an umbrella, guiding them through the front entrance. The lodge's lobby was grand, a high ceiling with rustic beams, a chandelier swaying from the force of the wind. Normally, it was a scene that boasted wealth and elegance, but tonight, it felt like a refuge in the midst of chaos. Sophie's clothes dripped onto the marble floor as Gabriel led her to a leather sofa near a towering fireplace. "We should get her something dry to wear," Gabriel told the caretaker, who nodded, scurrying off again. Sophie's teeth chattered, and she gripped the sofa arm to steady herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," she began, but Gabriel silenced her with a gentle motion of his hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. You're safe now." He caught a glimpse of her eyes, full of worry that went beyond the storm. Lightning flickered through the tall windows, casting shadows on her face that accentuated her vulnerability. Almost instinctively, Gabriel felt a surge of protectiveness. This was new territory for him, a man who prided himself on controlling every variable of his life. Perhaps he'd never realized how hollow that control felt until he was face to face with a human life that genuinely needed him. Just then, the caretaker rushed back with towels and some clothing, a plush robe that was probably meant for guests who spent fortunes to stay in the lodge's private suites. Sophie clutched the robe, gratitude evident in her gaze. Gabriel turned discreetly so she could have some semblance of privacy. Minutes later, a crackling fire was started in the massive stone fireplace. Sophie, wrapped in the robe, sat on the sofa, her wet clothes draped on a nearby chair. The caretaker fiddled with a first aid kit, uncertain of what else he could do. Meanwhile, Gabriel tried to reach emergency services on the landline. Static greeted him. The storm had taken down lines across the region, and cellular signal was equally useless. Sophie's breaths were shallow. Sometimes I have pains," she murmured, resting a hand on her belly. "The doctor said it's normal, but I haven't been able to go regularly. I can't always afford it." She paused, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Gabriel swallowed, troubled by the reality she was describing. "You don't need to be sorry," he said firmly. "Let's just make sure you're all right." As if summoned by his concern, lightning flashed again, revealing a menacing swirl of clouds outside. The wind roared, and it felt as though the entire lodge might shudder. Gabriel glanced at the caretaker. "Check if any local clinic is open, or if we can at least get a medical professional to drive here. Money is no object." Sophie lifted her gaze. Why are you doing this?" He didn't know how to answer. Because it's the right thing to do, was the first thought that crossed his mind, but he simply said, "Because you need help." She seemed about to say something else but winced, likely from another pain spasm, and clutched her stomach. Gabriel instinctively placed a hand on her shoulder. The caretaker reappeared, shaking his head. "No response from anywhere, sir. The roads are mostly flooded. It could be hours before help arrives." Gabriel exhaled a shaky breath, then turned back to Sophie. A new wave of tension spread through him. This was unlike any crisis he'd ever managed. In a board meeting, he could intimidate or outsmart the problem. Now, faced with a storm, a pregnant woman in need of care, and an isolated lodge, his usual strategies meant nothing. Yet, as he met Sophie's eyes again, there was a flicker of trust in them. Something about that trust, undeserved though it might be, steadied him. He draped a second blanket over her shoulders and said calmly, "We'll figure this out." Thunder boomed, and a gust of wind rattled the window panes. Outside, the storm raged on, as if determined to isolate them from the rest of the world. Inside, the lodge flickered with warm firelight, a fragile bubble of comfort in the midst of chaos. But in that moment, neither Gabriel nor Sophie realized how much their worlds were about to change forever, and how the fiercest storm might just lead to the calmest sunrise of their lives. Thunder shook the rafters of the lodge, making the old wooden beams groan in protest. Outside, wind-swept rain streamed across the windows, distorting the world beyond into watery streaks of gray. Inside the grand living room, Gabriel hovered near the sofa where Sophie lay curled under two blankets, her arms protectively wrapped around her swollen belly. The storm raged with unrelenting fury, as though determined to imprison them in this lavish but isolated fortress. For a moment, Gabriel stood there, silently wrestling with 1,000 thoughts. He was accustomed to addressing crises with spreadsheets, flowcharts, or quick, decisive phone calls. Yet none of those tools could tame the tempest outside, nor could they ease the soft moans escaping Sophie's lips whenever she felt a contraction-like pang. He was out of his element. The awareness sparked a strange, humbling sensation, one he wasn't used to. In his world, even nature was often bent to his will. Business jets soared above storms, palatial penthouses had weatherproof windows, and private limousines shielded him from all but the mildest discomforts. Now, in the face of a pregnant stranger's well-being, everything he knew seemed helplessly insufficient. From across the room, the caretaker, Charles, an older man Gabriel kept on staff to manage the property, stepped carefully around overturned luggage crates that had once been used to store out-of-season decor. He approached, face lined with concern. "Sir, the phone lines are still down. I tried again, but nothing. The main road is washed out in both directions." Gabriel nodded grimly, eyes flicking to the wide staircase that led to the lodge's second floor. "Then we keep her here until help can reach us. Check the guest rooms. Make sure we have clean sheets, towels, anything that might help." Charles headed off, boots echoing on the hardwood. Sophie let out a soft cough, and Gabriel snapped back to her side. "Are you all right?" He asked it gently, the question sounding foreign in his own mouth. Genuine concern, no business-like detachment. She drew in a shaky breath. "Still cold," she whispered, shivering despite the fire's warmth. Stray locks of damp hair clung to her forehead and her eyes looked hollow with fatigue. Thank you for letting me stay. I promise I won't be a burden." "A burden?" Gabriel repeated, his voice carrying a trace of incredulity. "You're not a burden, you're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You need help, that's all, and you'll get it." Sophie tried to nod, wincing at another wave of discomfort. He noticed her knuckles go white where they gripped the blanket. Alarm flared within him. "The pain? How often is it happening?" he asked softly. She swallowed, taking a slow breath as if to steady herself. It's irregular, but it feels stronger now. I haven't had proper prenatal visits in a while. I lost my job a few months back, then couldn't keep up with the bills. There was a free clinic, but it shut down." She bit her lip, blinking back the humiliation that sometimes came with explaining poverty. Gabriel felt a twist of guilt. He, who had spent obscene sums on trivial luxuries, rare wines, custom suits, faced the harsh truth of what it meant to have no safety net at all. How had he navigated so many social circles of power yet understood so little of everyday struggle? For a man so accustomed to seeing numeric values as barometers of success, here was a living reminder that numbers meant very little when measured against human vulnerability. He reached for her hand, a spontaneous gesture, surprising even to himself. "Sophie, as soon as the storm clears, I'll get you to a hospital. In the meantime, just try to rest. Charles is preparing a room for you." She looked at their joined hands, her expression shifting from worry to something like gratitude. A faint smile, tired but genuine, curved her lips. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely more than a whisper. Gabriel nodded, gently letting go before rising to add another log to the roaring fireplace. The flames crackled, casting flickering orange light across the lodge's opulent interior, walls adorned with abstract paintings, plush rugs that likely cost more than a year's rent in any average apartment. He found himself wondering if Sophie was noting the extravagance. Did it seem obscene to her? He felt a sudden pang of self-consciousness. She had no idea who he was beyond a stranger who'd stopped in a storm. Would she feel differently if she discovered just how wealthy he was? That question lingered, unanswered. A gust of wind rattled the lodge's massive front doors. Shadows wavered, dancing on the high ceilings. Just then Charles returned, breathless. "There's a suite upstairs, rooms in good shape. Linens, towels all fresh enough. Got a small generator running so we have some power at least. No luck on the phones though, the storm's only picking up." He paused, glancing at Sophie's drawn expression. "Should we move her now?" Gabriel nodded, turning back to Sophie. "Think you can walk if we help you?" She nodded, pushing herself up with trembling arms. Gabriel slipped an arm around her waist. Careful, gentle. Charles supported her from the other side. Inch by inch they guided her to the grand staircase. Each step looked like a monumental effort on Sophie's part. She clutched the banister, sweat beading on her temple. Behind them, an ominous crack of thunder shook the glass windows, and a flash of lightning lit up the corridor, revealing the plush runner rug that muffled their footfalls. By the time they reached the second floor, Sophie was panting, her face pale. Gabriel exchanged a worried glance with Charles, but neither voiced the alarm they felt. The caretaker led them down a wide hallway to a double door, which opened into a large suite with a vaulted ceiling. A canopied bed dominated the space, and heavy drapes framed tall windows outside which the storm raged in feral sheets of rain. They settled Sophie onto the bed, piling extra blankets around her. Charles quickly lit a few lamps, their warm glow battling the gloom. As Sophie sank into the pillows, Gabriel noticed her eyes fluttering, on the brink of exhaustion. "I'll get you some water," he said. "Charles, maybe some soup if the stove still works?" Charles gave a brisk nod and hurried out. Gabriel lingered, gently smoothing a blanket over Sophie's form. She looked up at him, her gaze soft. "This place is so fancy," she murmured, a hint of awe slipping through despite her fatigue. "Are you sure I can stay in here?" He forced a smile that he hoped was reassuring. "I'm sure. You deserve to be comfortable. Honestly, it's just a spare room that rarely gets used." She managed a faint laugh. "It's bigger than the apartment I lost a month ago." The statement hung in the air, and Gabriel felt it like a punch to the gut. The disparities of their realities were impossible to ignore, especially in a crisis this intimate. "Well, you're safe now," he said, then cleared his throat. "Do you need anything else?" Closing her eyes, Sophie exhaled shakily. "I just want to make sure my baby is okay. I don't have contractions often, not usually like this." Gabriel studied her face, reading the lines of tension. "Can you rate the pain?" he asked gently. "Is it mild, moderate, severe?" She opened her eyes again, blinking at him. "Moderate, I guess. They come and go. It's worse when I'm under stress or freezing in a storm," she added with a wry look. He nodded, though the seriousness of the situation weighed heavily on him. A simple twist of fate, and this woman, nearly a stranger, was now under his care. He straightened, tucking the blankets around her shoulders. "Try to rest. I'll be back in a moment." Outside the suite, the hallway glowed with scattered lamplight. Gabriel leaned against the wall for a moment, letting out a long breath. He could feel his heart thudding, a mixture of residual adrenaline and deep worry. This was more than an act of common decency. It felt like something was unfolding in the very foundations of his life, a shift that had begun the moment he braked his car in the storm. Pushing those thoughts aside, he descended to the first floor. Charles was in the kitchen, rummaging through a pantry that seemed to store more fine wines than basic groceries. "I found some canned soup," the caretaker said with an apologetic shrug. "It's not gourmet, but it'll do." Gabriel placed a hand on Charles's shoulder. "That's great, thank you. How about the generator? Is it stable? Any way to boost the signal for the phones?" Charles shook his head. "It's a sturdy generator, but the landline's out. And without a working cell tower nearby, I doubt we'll get a call through. We could attempt shortwave radio from the caretaker's shed if you want." Gabriel thought about it. "Try that. Let me know if you manage to reach emergency services or even a local clinic. Anything's better than nothing." Charles hustled off, leaving Gabriel to stir the pot of soup on the gas stove. The warm steam curled upward, carrying a comforting aroma. It struck him as surreal, one of the world's youngest billionaires, a man who hardly ever set foot in a kitchen, now stirring soup for a pregnant woman he'd just met. Yet there was a clarity to it, a stark honesty. Money was no shield in a scenario like this. Caring for someone, a stranger, was the only path. He filled a bowl, carefully carried it upstairs, and placed it on the nightstand beside Sophie's bed. She stirred, opening her eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. "I think I can manage to sit up." He helped her adjust the pillows until she could take the spoon into her trembling hand. After a few cautious sips, color seemed to return to her cheeks. He watched her for a moment, the thunder outside punctuating the silence. Then she set the spoon down, resting her hand atop her belly again. "You really didn't have to do all of this," she said, her voice catching at the edges. "People don't usually stop, you know? They see a hitchhiker or a stranger on the side of the road and just keep driving." Gabriel didn't have a simple answer. He only replied with quiet sincerity, "I'm not most people." She tilted her head, curiosity mingling with exhaustion in her eyes. "Clearly," she whispered, offering a hesitant but genuine smile. The storm rumbled again, and the wind howled through the eaves of the lodge. Still, in that small pocket of light and warmth, it felt as though an unexpected bond had formed between two very different souls. Neither of them knew that this single night, born from the fury of the elements, would spiral into a journey of discovery, healing, and the kind of connection that redefines a life forever. A crash of thunder rattled the high windows of the lodge, making Sophie flinch. Her eyes flashed open, and for a moment she stared at the canopy above, disoriented. But then she recognized the plush blankets, the soft lamplight, and Gabriel's concerned figure hovering at the edge of the suite. She exhaled shakily, shoulders relaxing. "How are you feeling?" he asked, stepping closer. He noticed the way her knuckles still gripped the bedspread. Sophie bit her lip. "Better than before. I can still feel some cramps, but at least I'm not out in that storm." Outside, rain slashed relentlessly at the windows. Distant lightning cast twisted silhouettes of tree branches onto the far wall, giving the impression of gnarled arms reaching inward. If not for the warmth of the fire burning in the lodge's downstairs hearth, its glow trailing faintly up the staircase, this place might feel downright haunted tonight. Gabriel paused, trying to sense whether her pain was worsening. He recalled how, earlier, her entire body tensed with each pang. Now, she seemed marginally calmer, though with each thunderclap, her expression clouded with renewed anxiety. "Let me know if it gets worse," he said gently. Sophie gave him a small nod. "I will. Thank you for checking on me." He reached for the glass of water sitting on the nightstand and offered it to her. "Drink," he murmured. "Keep hydrated." She sipped slowly, as if every ounce of water was precious. Then she glanced at him over the rim of the glass. "I'm sorry, but I still don't know much about you. You said your name is Gabriel. Do you, live around here?" He hesitated. Part of him wanted to dodge the question. For years he'd grown adept at avoiding personal details, especially around new acquaintances. But the look in her eyes wasn't curiosity for the sake of gossip. It was more like genuine interest, the kind that came without any hidden motive. "Not exactly," he answered, adjusting the edge of the blanket near her arm. "This is my property, but I don't spend much time here. I own a few businesses." A faint laugh escaped Sophie's lips despite her exhaustion. "A few, huh?" She looked around at the lavish suite. "Must be nice being able to have a place like this to run to when things get complicated. Most people don't have that option." Gabriel's pulse stumbled. There was no malice in her tone, just an unvarnished truth. He cleared his throat. "It's complicated," he said. "My life is usually planned to the minute. I travel constantly. Lately, I realized I needed space to breathe." He almost cringed at how stiff his explanation sounded. Sophie's gaze softened. "Space to breathe," she repeated, understanding in her voice. She set down the water. "I can see why you'd come to a place like this. It's beautiful, even if the storm makes it a little scary right now." He nodded, glancing at the wide windows. Lightning strobed again, bright enough to illuminate her face for an instant. He saw the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the worry etched across her brow. "I just wish we had phone service, so we could get you real medical help." She managed a small smile. "I'm tough. I'll manage." "Even so," Gabriel said, lowering his voice. "I'd rather not take any risks." Before Sophie could respond, there was a knock at the door. Charles, the caretaker, poked his head in. His hair looked disheveled, water droplets clinging to the sleeves of his sweater. "Sir, I gave the shortwave radio a try. No luck. Wind's too strong and the signal's scrambled by the lightning. I can't reach any emergency channel." A sense of unease wound through Gabriel's chest. He forced a calm expression. "Keep trying. And check the generator again, just in case. If it fails, we'll lose heat." Charles glanced at Sophie, sympathy in his gaze. Yes, sir. I'll keep at it. Then he nodded politely to her. Miss, if you need anything, extra blankets, different food, just say the word. She smiled weakly. Thank you, Charles. As the caretaker left, the door clicking shut behind him, Gabriel remained by the bedside. Sophie let her head sink back into the pillows. So, we're really on our own tonight, she murmured. He exhaled. It looks that way. The roads are flooded and communications are down, but we'll manage. For a long moment, they listened to the wind shrieking outside. The building groaned under the force. Sophie watched him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. Thank you for everything you've done, she said quietly. I know this isn't exactly convenient for you. He gave a short, humorless chuckle. Convenient? Maybe not, but it's not an inconvenience either. In truth, the more time Gabriel spent in that room, seeing Sophie's vulnerability, her courage in the face of so many unknowns, the more he questioned how he'd measured convenience his entire life. He'd built an empire by dismissing anything that wasn't useful. Now he found himself drawn to the very thing that brought no immediate profit at all, and that unsettled him more than any corporate power struggle ever had. Sophie gripped the edge of the blanket, letting her other hand rest on her abdomen. This little one hasn't made things easy, she confessed softly. I'm alone, and the father... She trailed off, swallowing whatever pain that statement held. I just hope I can do right by my baby. Gabriel's throat tightened. He knew it wasn't his place to pry, but the flicker of heartbreak in her eyes tugged at him. It can't be easy, he offered gently. She shook her head, her gaze dropping. I didn't expect to be in this situation, but life happens. I used to think if I worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, everything would be fine. Turns out, losing a job can be the difference between security and, well, walking along a highway in a storm. His chest tightened again. What about your family? Or friends? Someone who could help you? She inhaled sharply, as if the question stung. My mom passed a few years ago. I have an uncle somewhere up north, but we haven't spoken in ages. And my friends, they're all struggling too. It's not that they don't care, but they have their own problems. Gabriel nodded, stepping closer to rest a comforting hand on the bedpost. He could see tears threatening to gather in her eyes, though she blinked them away. It must be hard, he said. A silent moment passed between them, the kind of pause that felt heavy with unspoken stories. Outside, thunder rolled again, a low rumble signaling that the storm wasn't moving on anytime soon. Sophie turned her face slightly, gazing at the dancing shadows on the wall. Hard, yes, she murmured, but I'll manage. I have to, for my baby's sake. Then, after a heartbeat, she glanced up, meeting Gabriel's eyes. Not everyone would have stopped that car, or offered me a warm place, or soup. I really do appreciate it. He cleared his throat, feeling oddly vulnerable under her gratitude. It's the least I can do, he said. I'm just sorry it's not more. A ghost of a smile curved her lips. It's more than you know. A few minutes later, she seemed to grow drowsy, lulled by the fire's warmth and the lullaby of rain against the windows. Gabriel made sure the blankets were snug before stepping out into the corridor, quietly shutting the door behind him. The hallway felt cooler, despite the flickering sconces spaced along the walls. He leaned against the banister, trying to settle his thoughts. The caretaker's voice called from below. Sir, I have more logs for the fire. Should I bring them up? Just set them by the stairs, Gabriel replied, walking down to meet him. As he reached the foyer, the odor of wet wood and old smoke filled his senses. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the wide expanse of polished floor. Charles placed the logs by the foot of the stairs, then wiped sweat and raindrops from his brow. Everything all right with the young lady? Gabriel nodded absently, glancing toward the large living room windows. She's resting. She's been through a lot. He paused, scanning the caretaker's expression. Listen, Charles, I know we're short on resources, but if you can find anything that helps with mild pain relief or stress, I'll see if there's any basic medication in the first aid cabinet, Charles answered, nodding. And I'll keep trying the shortwave radio every hour. The storm might ease enough eventually to get a signal out. Thank you, Gabriel said, clapping him on the shoulder. He started walking away, but Charles cleared his throat softly, making him turn. Sir, if I may? The caretaker hesitated, eyes drifting upward toward the second-floor landing. I've been in your service for quite some time, and I've never seen you like this, worried about someone else, at least not so personally. A part of Gabriel bristled, unused to personal comments from an employee, but Charles's tone was kind, almost paternal. Gabriel forced a small, tired grin. I suppose I realized some things in the last few hours, he replied carefully. It's not about me right now. She's depending on us. Charles gave a thoughtful nod and murmured, Indeed she is, sir. Without another word, he slipped into the back hallway, likely heading to the caretaker's quarters to rummage for supplies. Standing alone, the billionaire drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The storm battered the windows, the wind howled, and the lodge's timbers creaked. But in that hush between thunderclaps, he could almost hear his own heart steadily beating as if reminding him of the responsibility he'd taken on. He climbed the stairs again, steps echoing in the grand space. Inside Sophie's suite, he found her asleep, though her features were etched with restlessness. The lamp's glow revealed the faint shine of tears that must have trailed down her cheek, now dried. Gently, Gabriel settled into an armchair across from the bed, folding his arms as he watched over her. He had no idea how the coming hours would unfold, whether the baby might decide to arrive unexpectedly, or if a fresh wave of pain would seize her. But he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving her side. Not now. Not until they got through this night and the storms beyond it. With another flicker of lightning, the entire room lit in stark white, then fell into darkness again. Outside, the tempest raged, but within these walls, a fragile promise had been made. Two strangers bound by circumstance, forging a trust that no wealth could buy. The fire in the lobby's hearth had long since burned down to a steady glow, casting dancing shadows on the walls that stretched and curved with every flicker of the embers. Upstairs, the corridor was hushed and dim as Gabriel stepped out of Sophie's room for a moment, hoping to clear the restlessness coursing through his veins. He stood at the polished railing overlooking the grand foyer below, watching the red glow flicker against the dark wood paneling. He had spent the last hour seated in that armchair near Sophie's bed, barely stirring except to check if she was still sleeping or to adjust her blankets. Every little sigh she made had him snapping to attention, wondering if she was in pain. Each time, she drifted back into uneasy slumber, her face etched with exhaustion. He felt an overwhelming concern, a protective feeling that both unsettled and anchored him. A flash of lightning illuminated the windows again, revealing the storm's relentless fury. The wind howled through the eaves, and thunder rumbled in a slow, ominous roll. Gabriel closed his eyes, trying to sort through the tumult in his head. Here he was, billionaire CEO, used to forging alliances and commanding respect in every boardroom. Yet when faced with the vulnerability of a single human being in need, it was as if he had finally found a purpose beyond profit margins. Footsteps behind him interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Charles, who carried a tray with a small teapot and 2 steaming mugs. The caretaker offered a faint smile. Figured you could use something warm, sir. Chamomile. I also found a little peppermint. Might help calm her if she's anxious. Thank you. Gabriel took the tray, inhaling the soothing aroma. Any luck with the radio? Charles shook his head, his expression creased with frustration. None. The wind is it's too strong. I'll give it another try at dawn. Maybe the storm will die down. Hopefully, Gabriel murmured. He glanced down the hall toward Sophie's suite. I'm going back in. She's been having these restless moments, like she can't fully sleep. A flash of worry flickered across his face. I keep thinking something's wrong. Charles studied him for a moment. It's good that you're by her side. Just holler if you need anything else. I'll be in the main room tending the fireplace. Gabriel gave a nod of gratitude and quietly re-entered Sophie's room. The lamp in the corner shed a gentle glow, revealing her slim form beneath the blankets. She stirred at the soft click of the door, blinking groggily in his direction. "Gabriel?" she whispered, voice a little raspy. He set the tray on the bedside table. "Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing slightly as she did so. "It's okay. I can't really stay asleep for long. Too many weird aches, and the storm's so loud." He poured her a mug of tea, swirling it gently to mix the leaves. "Charles found some chamomile and peppermint. Might help you relax a bit." He handed the mug to her, careful not to spill. "It's still too hot, though. Let it cool for a moment." She thanked him with a soft smile, cradling the warmth in her hands. Outside, thunder boomed again, making the windows vibrate. Gabriel tensed, glancing instinctively at her to see if it startled her. She took a slow breath. "I've never seen a storm quite like this. It's like it just won't let up." He pulled the armchair closer. "It's rare for this region, must be colliding fronts or something. Either way, we're stuck." Sophie nodded, blowing on the tea's surface. Then, setting the cup aside, she looked at him with an earnestness that made him straighten. "While I was sleeping, I had this dream. Or maybe it was a memory. Of the night I realized I was pregnant." She let out a shaky laugh. "I was so scared back then, but also kind of excited, you know?" A flicker of compassion lit Gabriel's gaze. "I can imagine it must have been overwhelming." "Overwhelming, yes." She paused, swallowing. "The father. He left when I told him. Said he wasn't ready. We were just... It wasn't serious, but I thought he might at least help. But he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby." She exhaled, a wry, broken chuckle escaping. "Funny how a single moment can change everything you thought was stable." Gabriel felt an ache in his chest. "I'm sorry. No one should face this alone." She shrugged, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I made my choices, right? I guess it was foolish to think it'd work out differently. But the baby..." Her voice softened, hand moving to rest on her belly again. "It's not this child's fault, so I'm doing what I can." He let the silence linger, unsure how to respond. Outside, the rain battered the glass. Sophie lifted the mug again, blowing gently, then took a tentative sip. That's good. I wish I could do more," he murmured. Then he caught himself. He always had that reflex, wanting to fix things with money. But this was more profound than an invoice or a business plan. He couldn't rewrite her past or guarantee her future. "I mean, if you need anything while you're here..." She gave him a gentle, grateful look. "You've already done a lot. Saved me from the storm. Fed me. Gave me a place to rest. That's more than most people would do." "But it's not enough," he insisted quietly. "You deserve proper medical attention, and if anything happens, I'm not exactly qualified to..." He trailed off, an edge of panic creeping into his tone. Her hand trembled slightly around the mug. "I know," she admitted, eyes dropping. "Sometimes, though, you do the best you can with what you've got." They sat like that for a spell, the hush between them broken only by the relentless weather. The warm tea scent filled the space. Gabriel cleared his throat, searching for something steady to say. "You mentioned you used to work. May I ask what you did?" Sophie sighed, setting the cup aside. "I was in retail, clothing store, worked the register, the fitting rooms. It was all fine until business slowed. They cut hours first, then staff, I tried looking elsewhere, but the economy's not great in my area. Then, once the landlord raised my rent, well, that was it." She rubbed her arm nervously. "I spent a few nights in my car before it broke down. Then the rest, you can guess." Gabriel felt a surge of anger, though not at her. Anger at a system that let someone like Sophie fall through the cracks so easily, while men like him profited beyond measure. He'd never questioned it before, not really. But now, with Sophie's words laid bare in front of him, he couldn't just shrug it off as the way of the world. He realized she was watching him, perhaps noticing the tension in his jaw. Quickly, he forced a calmer expression. I'm sorry," he repeated, and he meant it in ways he hadn't fully understood before. She let out a slow breath. "No use dwelling on it too much. If I could just get a stable place after the baby's born, maybe find another job somewhere that doesn't mind me being a single mom." Her gaze turned distant, as if she was imagining a life out of reach. A peal of thunder rocked the windows again, and they both glanced at the storm-lashed panes. On impulse, Gabriel reached out and covered her hand gently with his. "You're not alone tonight, at least," he said, voice warm with conviction. "We'll get through this storm, and then I'll make sure you're safe." Emotion flickered across her face, something like relief tangled with caution. She gave a half nod, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It means a lot to hear that," she murmured. Then, as if embarrassed by the vulnerability, she pulled her hand away gently and reached for the tea again, sipping to hide her shaky smile. Time passed in a slow, erratic rhythm, measured by the pounding of rain on the roof and the distant roll of thunder. Eventually, Sophie's eyes grew heavy once more, lulled by the warmth of the tea and the presence of someone who, at least for now, made her feel safe. She slid back under the blankets and drifted into a fitful doze, leaving Gabriel to brood in silence. He couldn't bring himself to leave her side. Everything about her situation weighed on him. The precariousness of her pregnancy, the meager belongings she owned, probably still in that broken-down car somewhere along the highway. And the child, a life not yet born, already touched by hardship. How could he reconcile that with his life of unchecked abundance? Eventually, he stood and gently paced to the tall windows. Lightning illuminated the storm-blackened sky, revealing sheets of rain lashing the pine trees that surrounded the property. In the reflection of the glass, he saw himself, a man who had prided himself on being self-made, on controlling every contingency. But fate had thrust him into something uncharted, a duty to another human being that no board meeting could prepare him for. He exhaled, pressing a hand to the window, feeling the cold through the glass. He wondered if, in all his pursuit of success, he'd lost sight of the simple truth that people needed people. Not contracts, not transactions, just genuine compassion and connection. And here was Sophie, reminding him in the most unexpected of ways that life's storms could strip one down to raw humanity. Suddenly, a soft whimper from the bed drew him back. He hurried to her side. Sophie's expression was tense, her breath catching. Then the wave passed, and she relaxed. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. "It's okay," she whispered through the haze of half-sleep. Without thinking, he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm here," he said simply, meaning it more deeply than he'd realized. The moment held, a fragile pocket of warmth in a world battered by tempests. Outside, the wind screamed against the eaves, but within these walls, a quiet promise had solidified. Whatever this night demanded of him, no matter how far it was from the realm of spreadsheets and negotiations, he would see it through, guided by a compassion that he'd never truly tapped into before. And Sophie, exhausted and uncertain, clung to the first real beacon of hope she'd had in ages. Together, they braced for whatever dawn might bring, with the storm howling on as their only witness. Night stretched on, laden with the ceaseless drone of wind and rain battering the lodge. The hours blurred together in a haze of thunder and flickering lamplight, Gabriel dozed intermittently in the armchair, waking whenever Sophie shifted or let out a startled gasp as the storm roared overhead. Each time he pushed aside his own fatigue to murmur reassurances, adjusting blankets or offering her sips of water. Sometime after midnight, Sophie's intermittent cramps gained strength, enough to have her clutching the sheets and wincing. Panic constricted Gabriel's chest at the sight of her pained expression. He crouched beside the bed, pressing a cool compress to her forehead. Her breath came in shallow bursts. "It's not real labor," she panted, eyes squeezing shut. "At least I don't think so. But it hurts more than before." "Maybe we should do something," he said, voice tight with worry. What if it is labor?" She shook her head, sweat beading at her temple. "Too soon," she whispered, trembling. "I'm not that close to my due date, but stress can bring on contractions. They might go away once I calm down." Gabriel swallowed, remembering stories he'd half heard from acquaintances about false labor or Braxton Hicks. He'd never paid attention before, not expecting it would matter to him. "All right," he murmured, trying to radiate calm he didn't feel. "Let me see if we have anything in the first aid supplies that can help." He hurried to the door, nearly colliding with Charles in the hallway. The caretaker held a battery-powered lantern in one hand and a small cloth bag in the other. "I came to see if she needed anything," Charles explained, eyeing Gabriel's anxious face. "She's in more pain," Gabriel said quickly. "Not full labor, but can you see if we have any mild pain relievers? Or anything that might help her relax?" Charles held up the cloth bag. "I found something, basic over-the-counter stuff. It might ease muscle cramps. But without a doctor's advice, we should be careful giving her anything." Gabriel exhaled sharply. "We have no doctor, no phone line. What choice do we have?" "I understand." Charles's voice remained calm, steady. "Let's offer her a small dose with food and see if it helps, and keep her hydrated. That might be enough for now." Gabriel nodded, returning to Sophie's side with Charles close behind. They explained the plan, and Sophie, though wary, agreed to try. After swallowing the medication with a few spoonfuls of broth, she leaned back, breath hitching as another wave of discomfort swept over her. Charles studied her, then turned to Gabriel and said softly, "Sir, maybe we can set up a more comfortable space. She shouldn't be lying flat if these cramps continue. Pillows propped up, maybe something warm on her lower back." They went to work, piling pillows and blankets behind her. Gabriel gently pressed a heated pad, warmed near the fireplace earlier, against her back. Sophie's features gradually softened as the medication and warmth seeped in, though she still grimaced from time to time. The storm raged outside like a living force. Wind rattled the window panes, and water cascaded off the roof in torrential sheets. A crack of lightning lit the suite in blinding white for a split second, and the echoing thunder made the walls tremble. Each crash seemed to set Sophie's nerves on edge. "It's all right," Gabriel murmured whenever she tensed at the thunder. He found himself reaching for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She squeezed back, eyes glimmering with tears she tried to hide. "It's silly," she managed, voice trembling. "I'm too old to be afraid of storms." "It's not silly," he said firmly. "Anyone would be scared in this situation." Charles cleared his throat discreetly. "I'll head downstairs, see if the fire's still going strong, and check the generator. Call me if anything changes." Gabriel nodded, grateful for the caretaker's tact in granting them a bit of privacy. He turned back to Sophie, noticing how fatigue now pulled at her eyelids. She looked so fragile that something twisted deep inside him, a protectiveness he'd rarely felt for anyone besides maybe his younger sister years ago. She took a shaky breath. "Would you mind staying? Just until I fall asleep?" He settled on the bed's edge, still holding her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." A small smile tugged at her lips. "You might regret that. What if this storm keeps us locked in here for days?" He shrugged, eyes soft. Then it keeps us locked in. I've faced boardroom showdowns that lasted that long. That earned a weak chuckle from her. Boardroom battles. Yikes. Maybe this is tame in comparison. Gabriel shook his head, remembering all those tense negotiations that once seemed like the pinnacle of life's challenges. No, he said quietly. This is far more real. She blinked, studying him. You talk about your business like it's something you're not sure about anymore, or am I reading you wrong? He swallowed. I'm not sure how to explain. My work, it's been my whole world for so long. I thought that was everything. Lately, he paused, searching for words. I've started to realize there might be more, but I don't know how to reach for it. Her hand gripped his gently. Maybe you just start, one step at a time. Their gazes held. The wind shrieked outside, the windows rattling as if in protest. In that moment, the strangest notion occurred to Gabriel. Perhaps this raging storm wasn't just an accident of weather. Maybe it was forcing him to face truths he'd have otherwise kept buried in the avalanche of daily business. He glanced at her abdomen, noticing how she placed a hand there, almost unconsciously every few minutes. A wave of concern flickered across his face. No more cramps? They come and go, she admitted, shifting slightly. But less intense now, I think. The medication is helping. Relief washed through him, and he inhaled deeply. Good. Maybe you can actually get some rest. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the pillow tower he'd created. Will you stay for a bit? She asked again. Of course, Gabriel replied. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour, as Sophie's breathing grew more regular, each exhale less shaky than the last. She drifted into a shallow sleep, occasionally stirring but not fully waking. He stayed right there, perched on the edge of the mattress, her hand still loosely clasped in his. At some point, a distant voice from the hallway startled him. He gently released Sophie's hand and stepped out, finding Charles waving him over. What is it? Gabriel asked in a hushed tone. They moved a few steps away from the suite door, the caretaker lowering his voice. Sir, the shortwave flickered for a moment, some static that almost sounded like voices. I lost it again, but it might be a sign that the storm's letting up just enough to get a signal. I'll keep trying. Gabriel's eyes lit with a spark of hope. Do it. If we can reach anyone, an ambulance, the local clinic, anything? Charles nodded. Yes, I'll go now. Gabriel watched the man depart toward the back staircase, then returned to the bedroom. Sophie was still in that half-sleep, brow furrowed as though lost in murky dreams. Gently, he re-tucked the blankets around her shoulders, taking a moment to brush away the damp strands of hair that clung to her face. Even in fitful sleep there was a grace about her, an unspoken perseverance that made him marvel. It was a stark contrast to the life he led. He had everything that money could buy, yet here she was, all but homeless, alone, pregnant, and braving more adversity in one night than he'd ever truly faced. A wave of humility rolled through him, followed by an odd sense of gratitude. To be here, in this moment, forced to confront the depth of what he'd been missing. When she stirred and opened her eyes again, he smiled. How are you feeling now? Her gaze found his. For a moment, she seemed disoriented. Then recognition smoothed her features. Bit better, she whispered, blinking. Did I doze off? Yeah, for about half an hour. She nodded, glancing around the room. I keep wondering if I'll wake up and find this was all just some dream, a crazy dream. He chuckled softly, though there was no humor in his eyes. You and me both, but it's real. Her stomach let out a quiet growl and she pressed a hand over it, a sheepish look crossing her face. Sorry, I guess I'm hungrier than I realized. That's a good sign, he said warmly. I'll see if Charles has something we can heat up. Soup, crackers, anything that will sit well. She nodded, and when he stood to leave, she reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Gabriel," she murmured. He paused, a strange tightness in his throat. It was just a simple gesture, two strangers holding hands in a moment of crisis. Yet it felt monumental, at least to him. He gave her fingers a light squeeze in return, then slipped away toward the hall. Downstairs, he found the caretaker rummaging in the kitchen pantry. The old man glanced over with a nod. "She awake?" Gabriel explained that she was hungry. Charles surveyed the limited supplies. "Well, I've still got that canned vegetable soup. Let's see, some crackers too, and maybe we can toast a bit of bread if the generator holds." Gabriel stood behind him, arms crossed, scanning the near-empty shelves. "We really don't stock much here, do we? Typically, you only bring guests for a weekend. Fine dining is delivered. We never had reason to store day-to-day groceries." "Right," Gabriel murmured. It was another glaring reminder of the gap between this place's luxury facade and practical needs. If not for the few leftover supplies, they might have had nothing at all. Charles lit the stove, setting the soup to heat. The generator hummed faintly in the background, occasionally flickering but holding steady. Over the pot, steam curled up, carrying the smell of vegetables and broth. Gabriel exhaled, feeling a spike of relief that at least they could feed her. "Think the shortwave is improving?" he asked. Charles shook his head. "It's still static. But maybe, once daylight comes, we'll get a clearer window. The storm might shift." Gabriel nodded, heart heavy with worry. "All right." Minutes later, armed with a steaming bowl and a small plate of crackers, he headed back upstairs. Sophie was sitting up, head resting against the mound of pillows. Her eyes lit with mild relief when she saw the food. She tried a spoonful, nodding appreciatively. "I don't usually care for canned soup," she said, lips quirking in a wry smile. "But right now, this tastes amazing." He settled in the chair again, watching as she ate. A comfortable silence wrapped them, broken only by the sounds of the storm outside. Every so often the thunder rolled menacingly, yet it felt slightly subdued compared to the earlier ferocity. Maybe, just maybe, dawn would break with calmer skies. She finished about half the bowl before leaning back, exhaustion stealing over her again. Gabriel took it from her gently. "Try to rest some more," he suggested. "If the pain flares again, just say the word." She agreed with a nod, eyelids fluttering. Before drifting off, she looked at him one last time. "Don't forget to rest yourself," she whispered. "You look like a ghost." A small chuckle escaped him. "I'll try." She was asleep in seconds, the lines of strain gradually easing from her face as the cramps appeared to diminish. Gabriel watched her for a beat longer, ensuring she truly was comfortable, then stood and stretched. The storm outside still had a few hours left in it by the sound of the relentless wind. As he reached the door, a soft hush fell over the suite, broken only by Sophie's steady breathing. He lingered on the threshold, gazing at the silhouette of the young, pregnant woman who had inadvertently brought him face to face with everything he'd never questioned. Then, with a resolve he couldn't fully explain, he whispered, "You're safe," under his breath, and stepped into the corridor. Morning would come soon, and with it perhaps a chance to break free from the confines of this storm-ravaged night. Yet, as Gabriel made his way downstairs to plan what came next, a quiet conviction had settled into his heart. No matter how the sky looked at dawn, his life would never be the same. Morning arrived in a gentle silver haze rather than the golden sunrise Gabriel might have hoped for. Outside the tall lodge windows, the sky remained thick with slate-gray clouds, and the wind continued its mournful whistle through the pine trees. Yet the most violent edges of the storm had passed, leaving only steady rain and occasional rumbles of distant thunder. It was an improvement, though not a complete reprieve. Gabriel stood at one of those windows on the second-floor landing, arms crossed, gazing at the pale light seeping through the drizzle. He'd managed only snippets of rest, half dozing in the armchair near Sophie's bed. His eyes felt gritty, and every muscle ached with fatigue, but his mind buzzed with concern about her well-being. Glancing at his watch, he realized it was barely past 6 in the morning, yet it felt as if he'd lived a week since their frantic arrival last night. Behind him, the door to Sophie's suite creaked open. He turned to see her peering out into the hallway. She wore the same borrowed robe and held a hand lightly against her belly, though she was upright and standing, a good sign. Worry flickered across his features, and he moved toward her in quick strides. "You should be resting," he said gently. "Did something happen?" She gave a wan smile, stepping aside so he could join her inside the room. "I woke up feeling better, actually. The cramps aren't gone, but they're less intense." There was relief in her tone, but also an underlying note of caution, like she was worried about jinxing her luck. "I couldn't just lie there anymore. The storm quieted some, so I thought maybe you were making progress on calling for help." He looked her up and down, noting the faint shadows under her eyes. "I'm glad you're feeling a little stronger." He paused, letting out a slow exhale. "Charles has been trying the shortwave radio again, and the signal is still patchy. We haven't managed to get a direct line to emergency services. The roads might be partially flooded for miles." Sophie's face fell slightly, but she nodded, determination returning to her features. "Then we'll make the best of it." Her gaze wandered to the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the view of evergreen trees and the winding driveway that disappeared into the mist. "If the roads are a little better, maybe we can drive out?" Gabriel shifted, wishing he could promise that. "We'll see." Charles planned to take the four-wheel drive out for a short test. If the roads are still impassable, it'd be too dangerous. But maybe there's a smaller local clinic we can reach, or even a neighbor with a stable phone line. She smiled at that, eyes reflecting hope. "That would be amazing." He gestured toward the bed. "But first, sit. Let me at least get you some breakfast. You must be starving." Sophie relented, easing back onto the mattress, though she looked restless. "I feel guilty. You're running around taking care of me constantly. Gabriel held up a hand, halting her words. "Don't. Please. It's not a burden." He softened his tone. "I've spent my whole life delegating and paying people to handle things for me. I can manage scrambled eggs and toast." She laughed softly at his earnestness. "Okay, sure. But if you burn something, I won't judge." He offered a playful smirk, backing out of the room. "I'll try not to set the lodge on fire." Downstairs, he found Charles in the foyer, shrugging into a raincoat. The caretaker's cheeks were flushed from an early morning attempt at the radio once more, but he wore a guarded expression. "Static," he reported. "Same as before. I'm about to check the roads with the Jeep, but I'm not optimistic. There's a mudslide warning in these parts, so if the route is blocked—" Gabriel sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "All right, be careful. And if you find even a single stretch of passable roadway, we'll try to get her out to the nearest medical center." Charles nodded, then lowered his voice. "How's she doing?" "Better. Less pain, but we can't risk waiting until it comes back full force. She needs proper prenatal care." Without further ado, the caretaker set off, bracing himself for the unsteady weather. Gabriel watched through a side window as Charles climbed into the older four-wheel drive Jeep, wipers already working furiously against the pelting rain. The vehicle's headlights cut through the gloom as it disappeared around a bend lined with waterlogged shrubs. Turning to the kitchen, Gabriel surveyed what supplies were left. He rummaged through the meager pantry, retrieving a carton of eggs and some bread that was miraculously not stale. A flick of the gas stove knob ignited the burner, and he set about preparing what he hoped would be an edible breakfast. It was a far cry from the gourmet meals catered to him in Manhattan boardrooms or private jets. As he whisked the eggs, he caught himself thinking of how foreign it felt to be doing something so domestic, and how strangely grounding it was. He was used to living in a curated bubble. Now every small act, from stirring soup to cracking eggs, felt purposeful in a way beyond profit margins. In under 10 minutes he had a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and a small bowl of fruit he'd found lurking in the back of the fridge. He arranged it all on a tray, added a glass of water, then carefully carried it upstairs to Sophie's suite. The heavy wooden door was ajar, and he nudged it open with his foot. She sat upright, fiddling with the sleeve of the robe. When she saw the tray, her eyebrows lifted. "Wow, you really did it," she teased gently. "You cook?" He shrugged, setting the tray on the small dresser before placing it in front of her. "I can manage the basics. We'll see if it tastes any good." A warm smile touched her lips as she picked up a fork. "Smells great." She took a bite, sighing contentedly. "Thank you." Gabriel settled in the armchair again, crossing one ankle over the other. He watched her eat, noticing the slight tremble in her hands. She was probably still nervous, and rightfully so. The lodge, the storm, her precarious situation, anyone would feel on edge. He cleared his throat. "So, last night you mentioned you had an uncle. Have you considered contacting him if we manage to get out of here?" She lowered her fork, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "I don't even know where he lives these days. My mom and he had a falling out. He came around when I was little, but after that, no calls, no letters. I tried searching online once, but with no luck." She shook her head. "Anyway, it's probably a dead end." Gabriel didn't push. He simply nodded, a small crease forming between his brows. "And your father?" "Never knew him," she replied softly, focusing intently on the toast. The conversation clearly touched nerves she hadn't wanted to bear. "I understand," he murmured. Feeling her discomfort, he shifted topics. "Well, if we can't find a passable road, we'll keep trying the radio. If you'd rather just stay put until it's safe to leave, we can do that too. I just want you to know you aren't trapped." Her gaze lifted, gratitude and uncertainty mingling in her eyes. "Thanks," she whispered. "It's so surreal to think I ended up in a place like this. Feels like I'm intruding on a world that doesn't belong to me." He shook his head. "You're not intruding. Believe me, I've had dozens of guests here, and none of them have needed this place more than you do." A faint blush crept across her cheeks at his direct kindness. She took another bite, chewing slowly, and then spoke in a near whisper. "I'm still so worried about everything. My car, my finances, this baby. I'm grateful you helped me, but what happens when we go our separate ways? I'll still be me." The vulnerability in her question struck him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You'll still be you," he repeated softly. "But maybe with a little help we can make sure you have a better shot, if that's what you want." Her brow furrowed. "I can't take your money. I'm not suggesting charity." He tried to keep his voice gentle. "But I can offer you resources, maybe a short-term job once you're back on your feet. I own plenty of businesses, and I'm sure we could find something you'd be comfortable doing. Unless that offends you." She set the plate aside, appetite visibly waning. "I'm not offended," she said, though her tone carried a quiver of pride. "It's just that people have looked down on me before. I don't want pity." "It's not pity," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "You have to believe me. My life has been about power and deals, yes, but this is different. I'm doing it because I think you deserve a chance. A real one." Sophie's eyes misted. She swallowed hard, then glanced away, fidgeting with the robe's collar. I'll think about it." They left it at that, a delicate thread of tension and possibility lingering in the air. The wind outside rattled the window, as if reminding them that the storm might still have the final say in all their plans. But for the moment, a fragile understanding hung between them, that perhaps fate had put them here for reasons neither fully grasped. Gabriel rose, picking up the half-finished tray. "Try to rest again. If Charles finds a path on the roads, I'll let you know." He hesitated, then added, "And if you need to move around, just be careful. Don't push yourself." Sophie nodded, murmuring a quiet thanks. After he left, she sank against the pillows, head swirling with emotions she wasn't ready to name. There was relief in her body that she wasn't under immediate threat of labor, yet tension about her future remained, overshadowing every small comfort. Downstairs, Gabriel set the tray aside in the kitchen. The old stove hissed softly as he turned it off. His mind roamed over the conversation, over Sophie's hesitation to accept his help. In the corporate world, everything was transactional. People made deals with him eagerly, sometimes desperately. But Sophie's reluctance came from dignity, from a sense of independence that he found both admirable and heartbreaking. Abruptly, the back door opened, letting in a rush of damp air. Charles clambered in, rain dripping from his coat, boots caked with mud. He removed his hood and shook droplets onto the doormat, face grim. "No good news, sir. The main road is blocked by a downed tree and what looks like a minor landslide. Even with four-wheel drive, I couldn't get very far." Gabriel's heart sank, though he'd half expected it. "So we're still stuck here with no real communication?" Charles nodded, folding his arms. "I'll keep trying the shortwave. Maybe we can get a line to a ranger station or some local ham radio operator. But traveling on foot is too dangerous. The ground's unstable." Gabriel let out a slow breath, shoulders sagging. "Thank you. At least we know now." He glanced at the staircase. Sophie's uncertain future felt even more precarious with this news. "Let's keep calm and see if the storm's calmer tomorrow. Meanwhile, we look after her." The caretaker gave a solemn nod. "Indeed, I'll double-check the generator. We can't lose power, especially if her cramps worsen again." Left alone in the kitchen, Gabriel braced his hands on the counter, gazing at the dull reflection of himself in the sleek, dark surface. Rain battered the glass of the windows, each drop a small hammer of inevitability. They were locked in place by nature's decree. In the quiet that followed Charles's departure, Gabriel let himself feel the full weight of responsibility. He was no longer just a wealthy bystander in this woman's story. He was fully enmeshed, albeit unexpectedly. If the storm taught him anything, it was that money had its limits. At this moment, he'd give all the gold in the world to ensure Sophie's safety, to ease her fears and guarantee the future of her unborn child. Yet the sky raged with unfeeling disregard, severing them from the outside world. No private plane or black credit card could fix that. What he could do, however, was remain constant. Perhaps that counted for more than he realized. Determined, he straightened and climbed the stairs again, ignoring the exhaustion creeping through his bones. If they were to be stranded, they would make it through together. If the weather refused them escape, they would wait, adapt, and endure. For Sophie, for her child, and for a sense of humanity that Gabriel found himself fighting to preserve in a world that often reduced everything to numbers. At the top of the landing, he paused to gather himself. The door to her room was slightly ajar, and he heard a soft rustling sound within, Sophie shifting on the bed or perhaps walking a few steps to stretch her legs. He wondered if she was in pain again, or if she was simply restless. Quietly, he tapped the door frame. "Sophie?" She looked up from where she stood by the window, cradling her belly. "Hey," she murmured. "I was just looking at the rain." He stepped inside. Charles tried the road. No success. "It's impassable for now." Her lips pressed into a thin line, acceptance tempered by disappointment. "So we're here for a while longer." Gabriel nodded. "But you're safe. We have enough food for a couple of days, and the generator is holding. If anything changes with your pains—" He paused, voice tightening. "Well, we'll handle it." She gave a small, grateful smile. "Okay, thank you, Gabriel." They stood there, two unlikely companions gazing out at the watery gray morning. The wind hissed over the roof, and the trees bent under the drizzle, but the earlier wrath had subsided to a sullen simmer. In that hush, Gabriel silently vowed he would see her through this, no matter how many storms battered them, literal or metaphorical. Something profound had shifted in him, and he sensed she felt it too, a fragile bond forming between souls that had once existed worlds apart. And there, in the trembling quiet of dawn, they waited for the next chapter to unfold, unsure of where fate would lead, but drawn together by necessity, empathy, and perhaps even the first flickers of something that neither dared to name. A gray afternoon glow settled over the lodge, replacing the morning's feeble light. The rain still tapped steadily against the windows, but the once deafening thunder had abated to the occasional low rumble. A subdued hush filled every corridor, as though the ancient timbers of the building were finally exhaling after hours of battering wind. Gabriel found himself seated in the main living room, an open ledger balanced on his knees. It was one of those unnecessary habit items he traveled with, documents related to a potential expansion deal for one of his companies, something that would normally command his undivided attention. Yet, as he stared at the crisp pages, his mind drifted elsewhere. Sophie's face, etched with both determination and hidden worry, kept surfacing in his thoughts, superseding any corporate concerns. The crackle of the fireplace pulled him back to the present. He glanced over at Charles, who had just finished coaxing the dwindling flames back to life. The caretaker wore a weary expression, his usually neat hair still slightly damp from his venture outside. He caught Gabriel's eye, gave a faint nod, then stepped away, heading for the shortwave radio station set up in an adjoining office. The caretaker's footsteps echoed in the hush, a reminder of how few people actually inhabited this lavish space. Moments later, Gabriel closed the ledger. The numbers blurred, overshadowed by the lodging of new priorities in his mind. Setting the papers on a side table, he rose and made his way upstairs to check on Sophie. His heart rate quickened slightly at the thought, an odd mix of concern and something warmer, more personal. He knocked softly on her door. A muffled, "Come in," sounded from within. Entering, he found her standing near the bed, stretching her arms above her head. She winced a little, probably from residual aches, then caught his gaze and offered a small, brave smile. "Doing a few stretches," she said by way of explanation, lowering her arms. "Sitting or lying down too long makes my back stiff." Gabriel nodded sympathetically, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The suite was cast in gentle lamplight, the windows revealing a murky wash of rain beyond. "That's good, as long as you're careful," he said gently. "How are your cramps?" She let out a slow exhale. "They come and go, but nowhere near as bad as last night. I think the rest and the medicine helped." Her eyes flicked past him toward the hallway. "Any updates from Charles about the roads?" Gabriel shook his head. "Still flooded and partially blocked. He's working the shortwave again. No luck so far, but we're hoping conditions might improve by tonight or tomorrow morning." Sophie's shoulders slumped a fraction. "I figured. It's so strange to think the rest of the world goes on while we're here, like we're cut off in some time warp." He studied her face, noticing the mixture of longing and unease. "We'll get out of this time warp soon," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Until then, is there anything you need? Another meal? Maybe a walk around the main floor?" She bit her lip, as though embarrassed by the swirl of her own thoughts. "I do feel cooped up, but I'm also exhausted from the broken sleep. Would it be okay if I just sat downstairs by the fire for a bit?" "Of course," he replied immediately. "Let me help you. The stairs can be tricky if you're still feeling unsteady." Sophie flashed a small, grateful smile. "I might take you up on that. These little dizzy spells come out of nowhere sometimes." He offered his arm, and she looped her hand through it. Their eyes met for a brief second, an unspoken connection flaring between them. Neither spoke of it aloud, though the warmth of her fingers against his sleeve sent a gentle tremor through Gabriel's heart. They made their way down the broad staircase slowly, Sophie leaning just enough on his arm to steady herself. Her expression was set with a quiet determination. She seemed unwilling to appear helpless, even in her vulnerable state. Gabriel admired that, sensing an inner resilience forged by a life of challenges. In the living room, Charles had left the fire in a healthy blaze. The room was warmer than most parts of the lodge, the flickering glow painting the plush couches in shades of amber. Gabriel guided Sophie to the softest sofa near the hearth, where she sank down with a sigh of relief. "Better?" he asked, hovering to be sure she was comfortable. She nodded, relaxing against a throw pillow. "Yeah, the heat helps my back." He busied himself adjusting the blankets and cushions, then noticed her gaze drifting around, taking in the high-beamed ceiling, the polished hardwood floors, and the curated pieces of art on the walls. Her eyes lingered on an abstract painting featuring swirling gold and dark blues. "This is the nicest place I've ever stayed," she murmured, following a trail of color in the artwork. "I mean, it's basically a mansion." Gabriel attempted a modest shrug. "It's large," he conceded. "I guess I never thought much of it. I bought it mostly as an investment property, somewhere to host certain corporate retreats." She quirked an eyebrow, lips curving in mild amusement. "Right. You mentioned you own multiple businesses. It's so far from my reality it almost sounds like fiction." He settled into an armchair across from her, hands clasped. "I suppose it might. To be honest, I rarely relax in places like this. Usually I'm either flying to meetings or stuck behind a conference table." Sophie studied him, her expression thoughtful. "So what do you do when you're not working? Any hobbies?" The question brought a flicker of uncertainty to Gabriel's face. "I sometimes play tennis, travel, but mostly for business, not pleasure. My hobby, if you can call it that, has always been building the next project or forging the next deal." She frowned gently. "Doesn't sound like much fun." He let out a half-laugh, half-sigh. "It isn't, not really. I didn't question it for years, though. I just believed that was what success meant." Her gaze softened with empathy. "Sometimes it takes a wake-up call. Something that stops you in your tracks and makes you see what really matters." "Like a storm," he said, voice quiet. "Yeah," she agreed, eyes glistening slightly. "Or a baby on the way when you're not ready. Or losing a job that you thought defined you." A deep hush filled the space, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Gabriel felt an urge to reach across the small coffee table and take her hand again, but he wasn't sure if that would be too bold. Instead, he settled for meeting her gaze, letting the sincerity in his eyes speak volumes. Eventually, footsteps in the corridor signaled Charles's return. The caretaker appeared, a mix of relief and frustration etched on his features. "Mr. Sorensen, Miss Sophie." He nodded politely to her. Then he turned back to Gabriel. "The shortwave is still giving mostly static, but I caught part of a broadcast from a weather station. They said the storms will persist through tomorrow. Possibility of more rain tonight." A weight pressed onto Gabriel's chest at the news. He glanced at Sophie, who listened with a small grimace. "So we're likely stuck here another night," she said. Charles nodded. "Likely, but I'll keep monitoring. Maybe we'll get a line through. And if the rain eases, I can try the road again tomorrow." Gabriel mustered a brisk nod, a businessman's mask slipping momentarily over his concern. "Thank you, Charles. Are we okay on supplies?" "I believe so," the caretaker replied. "Plenty of firewood, and I can rummage for more canned goods. We should be fine for a couple of days, but not much longer." With that, Charles retreated to the adjacent office. Sophie gazed into the hearth, shoulders sagging in resignation. "I guess we keep waiting," she murmured. Gabriel leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "I'm sorry. I can't imagine how anxious this must be for you." She rubbed a hand over her belly. "I'm still worried about going into early labor. The cramps are calmer now, but anything can change." Her voice trembled. "I know I'm probably fine, but it's scary not knowing." He inhaled, feeling her fear echo in his own chest. "I wish I could promise you that everything will be all right, but all I can do is be here, do whatever it takes to help. You're not facing this alone." Her eyes flashed with emotion. "That means more than you know," she whispered. After a moment, she drew in a breath and tried to brighten her tone. "So, how about we do something else? We could talk about something more cheerful." A gentle grin tugged at his lips. "Like what?" "Tell me about your family if you want," she suggested, surprising him. "You said you have a sister?" He blinked, impressed she remembered such a minor detail. "Yeah, Serena. She's younger than me by 10 years. She's in grad school for environmental science. He paused, a flash of fondness crossing his face. "She's the only person in my family who doesn't treat me like a walking bank account or a business asset. She's always pushing me to think about bigger things than making money." Sophie's eyes lit with curiosity. "Sounds like a good sister. Do you see her often?" Gabriel shook his head, regret creasing his brow. "Not enough. I sponsor her research sometimes, but she's fiercely independent. We mostly exchange texts and the occasional phone call. She's studying abroad right now, or I'd probably call her for advice on how to handle a situation like this." His gaze flicked to Sophie's belly, a soft warmth filling his chest. Sophie's cheeks colored, as if the mention of her pregnancy still carried a thread of vulnerability. "She'd probably tell you to take me to the hospital ASAP," she joked lightly. He chuckled. "No doubt. But we're trying. We have the Jeep ready whenever a break in the weather shows up." She nodded, then studied him more closely, noticing how the lines of exhaustion and concern wove across his face. "You look tired. Really tired. Why don't you rest for a bit? I'll be okay. The pain is manageable." Gabriel glanced at the large armchair near the fireplace. "I guess I could sit there for a while, but if you need anything, I'll call you," she promised. "I'm just going to sit here by the fire. The heat is helping." With a reluctant nod, he walked to the chair, sank into its cushions, and exhaled. Warmth enveloped him. The soothing glow of the flames, the distant hum of rain, and Sophie's presence. Closing his eyes, he let the tension in his shoulders melt away, if only for a moment. As the minutes ticked by, Sophie remained on the couch, occasionally shifting to find a comfortable position. She kept her focus on the fire's dance, though her thoughts frequently drifted to the man dozing nearby. The gentle lines of concern on Gabriel's brow, even in sleep, made her heart twist with complicated feelings: gratitude, admiration, and an unspoken longing for safety. She told herself it was just because he had saved her in a moment of sheer desperation. Yet deep down, she sensed the stirrings of something more. Neither of them truly belonged in the other's world, yet here they were, locked in a storm-lashed lodge, forging a bond that defied all logic. Hours slid by in a soft hush, broken only by the popping of embers in the hearth. Every once in a while, Gabriel stirred, opening his eyes to check if Sophie was all right. She offered him a smile each time, and the flicker of warmth in her gaze lulled him back to rest. Outside, the rain droned on, but its edge was gentler now, more a sorrowful lament than a furious tempest. Their enforced closeness, their quiet confessions, and the shared weight of uncertainty all wove together, forming an intimacy that neither had sought yet both found solace in. In that space where storms had forced them to linger, new seeds of understanding began to root in their hearts, fragile perhaps, but unmistakably alive. Afternoon blurred into evening as the rain maintained its gentle, steady rhythm against the lodge windows. While the storm no longer raged with the same fury, it refused to let go entirely. keeping the grounds sodden and the winding forest road impassable. An otherworldly hush settled over the property, as though time had slowed to match each patient drip from the eaves. In the living room, Gabriel awoke with a start from his unintended nap. He blinked, disoriented, then remembered where he was. The fire had receded to embers, their glow illuminating the room in soft, pulsing light. Shadows stretched and swayed, flickering across the rustic beams overhead. Sitting up straight, he ran a hand through his hair and glanced around. Sophie was no longer on the sofa. That realization jolted him fully awake. Standing swiftly, he scanned the dim room. One of the blankets lay crumpled where she'd been sitting. The caretaker, Charles, was nowhere in sight. With a sudden spike of alarm, Gabriel moved to the archway leading to the foyer, unsure if Sophie might have gone exploring or taken a walk around the lodge. He found her in the main corridor, standing before a tall window that overlooked the side gardens. She'd pulled the drapes aside, letting in what little pale light remained in the evening sky. She was utterly still, gazing at the rain-soaked pines and the muddy paths that vanished among them. Something in her posture spoke of longing, or perhaps resignation. Gabriel approached quietly, clearing his throat gently when he was a step or two behind her to avoid startling her. She turned, and he noted the faint tension in her face, though she attempted a small smile. "You're awake," she murmured. "Sorry, I didn't want to disturb you. You looked so exhausted." "It's all right," he assured her, voice soft. "I was worried when I didn't see you in the living room." She exhaled, half an apology. "I just needed to stretch my legs. The couch was making my back cramp again." She turned back to the window, letting the curtain fall away. "It's almost pretty, isn't it? The forest, drenched in this rain." He nodded, standing beside her, close enough that he could catch her subtle scent, a mix of soap and the lingering trace of peppermint tea. "It is," he agreed, following her gaze, "although I wish the weather would clear so we can get you somewhere safer." Her lips quirked. "Me too. But as storms go, at least this one is letting us breathe a little." She slid a cautious hand over her abdomen, as though listening to signals from within. "I haven't had a bad cramp in hours. Maybe the baby's cooperating, for now." The two of them fell silent, watching the drizzle turn silver in the dying light. Outside, the tall evergreens dripped with water that glistened whenever a bolt of distant lightning threaded across the sky. For a moment it felt as though the world was reduced to this intimate bubble, just a pregnant woman, a man awakening to new concerns, and an ancient forest bearing witness. Eventually, Sophie shifted her weight, crossing her arms around her middle. "I was thinking earlier about how this is the first time in weeks I haven't felt panic every second. It's ironic, isn't it? We're stranded, yet I don't feel quite so alone." Gabriel glanced down at her. "I'm glad you don't feel alone, but I can't help wishing you weren't stuck in such uncertainty." A wry smile touched her lips. "Uncertainty is normal for me, though I'll admit, it's easier to face when you're not doing it on the side of a highway." He nodded gravely, remembering the image of her struggling against the storm on that roadside. The memory still sent a chill through him, realizing how easily he might have driven past, lost in his own head. "I'm grateful I stopped," he said quietly. She studied his face, her own expression softening. "Me too," she said simply, the sincerity in her tone speaking volumes. They both startled as Charles's voice carried from the other end of the hall. "Mr. Sorensen, I've put together a bit of supper. Miss Sophie, if you're hungry, I found some packaged pasta and vegetables. It's warming now." Gabriel and Sophie exchanged a look, an unspoken agreement that they should at least try to eat. She walked with him toward the lodge's dining room, leaning occasionally on his offered arm. Overhead, the antique chandelier glowed with a subdued radiance, powered by the humming generator that, thankfully, continued to hold despite the damp conditions. The large dining table, carved from dark mahogany, looked far too grand for just a handful of simple plates. Charles had set up near the smaller corner of the room, where a few chairs clustered around a smaller wooden table. A pot of steaming pasta rested next to a dish of sautéed vegetables. The caretaker hovered uncertainly, as though unsure if they'd prefer to dine in the sumptuous main setting or remain casual. "Thank you, Charles," Sophie said, sinking into a chair. "Smells good." He bowed his head politely, then looked to Gabriel. "Sir, do you need anything else?" Gabriel studied the caretaker's careworn face and shook his head. "This is more than enough. Why don't you join us? There's plenty." Charles hesitated. It was obvious he wasn't used to mingling at the same table as his employer, yet Sophie's gentle smile nudged him past his reserve. "All right," he consented softly, taking a seat at the table's edge. They ate quietly at first, each lost in private thoughts. Sophie noticed how Gabriel kept stealing quick glances at her, checking for any sign of distress. The caretaker, though obviously loyal to his professional role, seemed relieved by the warm meal and the partial relaxation of formality. At one point, Sophie set her fork down, pausing with her hand against her belly. Gabriel tensed, eyes darting to her. She met his gaze, lips curving faintly. "It's just a kick," she explained. "The baby's active. Here, feel." Without a second thought, she guided Gabriel's hand over the curve of her abdomen, just where a gentle thump echoed from within. The unexpected physicality of it made his breath catch. Never had he experienced anything like this, feeling life move beneath his palm. For a second, he almost forgot how to exhale. He struggled for words, his voice hushed. "It's incredible." Sophie's eyes shimmered with the subdued joy she sometimes tried to hide. "Yeah," she murmured. "Reminds me why all this is worth it." Charles politely busied himself by refilling water glasses, giving them space to share that moment. After a beat, Sophie withdrew her hand and Gabriel did the same, though the memory of that tiny kick lingered, an electric imprint in his chest. They finished the meal with sporadic conversation, talk of the lodge's history, which Charles knew in detail, and stray mentions of the outside world they all longed to rejoin. Finally, with plates cleaned and appetites sated, they drifted back to the living room. Sophie found a spot on the sofa, leaning her head against a cushion, while Gabriel and Charles discussed the possibility of testing the Jeep again at first light if the rain continued to lessen. Night came gently, without the earlier drama of thunder and lightning. The sky remained laden with clouds, but the lightning had receded to a faint glow on the horizon. Outside, the hush of rainfall merged with the soft hiss of wind through wet branches. After Charles left to do a final sweep of the property's perimeter, Gabriel settled by the fireplace, feeling the day's tension coil in his muscles. Sophie was on the sofa, a blanket across her legs. He noticed how she rubbed slow circles over her abdomen, occasionally wincing but not in intense pain. "Another cramp?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Mild, though. It's more discomfort than anything." He frowned, wanting to help but not sure how. "Would it help if I got another warm compress?" "That might be nice," she admitted, "just to soothe these muscles." He hurried to the kitchen to heat a cloth pad, grateful for something concrete he could do. When he returned, she managed a grateful smile and pressed the heated compress to her lower back, exhaling softly. The fire's glow caught the tired lines under her eyes, a reminder that this was still a precarious situation. Gabriel ventured closer, sitting on the sofa's edge. "We can move you back upstairs if that's more comfortable to sleep," he offered. She hesitated, glancing around the living room. "Honestly, I kind of like being near the fireplace, and this couch is surprisingly comfortable. Maybe I'll stay here for a while. That is, if you don't mind." "Of course not," he reassured her. He stood and grabbed a spare pillow, adjusting it behind her back. "Whatever makes you feel best, I'll be close by." Sophie's gaze lingered on him. her eyes reflecting gratitude and a hint of curiosity. "Why are you doing all this, Gabriel?" she asked softly, not for the first time. "Beyond basic kindness, you've gone above and beyond." He swallowed, reading the earnest question in her face. Honestly, because I care, because you need help, and because—" He paused, struggling to articulate the swirl of realizations he'd experienced. "Because I've spent so long chasing the next milestone that I forgot how to be human, to connect on a genuine level. Meeting you made me see that. And now I want to do right by you." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "It feels like more than that," she whispered, voice wavering. "I'm not used to being anyone's priority." Gabriel's heart gave a peculiar twist. He sank back onto the couch, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You deserve to be a priority," he said firmly. "And you will be, whether that's with me offering resources or just being here until you can stand on your own again." A film of tears glossed her eyes, though she blinked them away determinedly. I can't promise I'll accept all you offer. I've always wanted to prove I could handle things on my own. But thank you for seeing me as more than a burden." He reached out, gently covering her hand with his. Warmth pulsed between them, the simple contact resonating in the fire-lit hush. "You're not a burden," he murmured. "You're strong, Sophie. I just think you shouldn't have to be strong all by yourself." She let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sob. "You're really messing up my carefully constructed walls, you know," she teased, voice still shaky. He chuckled softly, giving her fingers the faintest squeeze before withdrawing his hand. "Likewise," he confessed, "you've made me realize how hollow my life was behind all the success." A delicate quiet enveloped them, the fire popping faintly as embers shifted. The world outside was a symphony of soft rain and whispering pines. Within the lodge, two souls inched closer to a bond neither had anticipated. The boundary between rescuer and rescued faded into something more nuanced, where trust and genuine care formed the foundation. Eventually, Sophie's eyelids grew heavy. Exhaustion, the day's stresses, and the gentle heat lulled her toward slumber. Gabriel, vigilant, made sure she had enough blankets, then tucked a cushion beneath her head. She murmured a sleepy thank you, too tired to protest. Before exiting the room, he paused for a final glance. The flickering firelight danced over her features, highlighting the quiet vulnerability and fierce resilience that coexisted in her expression. He felt a rush of protectiveness, tinged with a deeper sentiment he couldn't fully name. As he retreated upstairs to fetch his own blanket, intent on camping out nearby in case she needed him, one thought accompanied him. Every storm, however fierce, eventually passed. But the changes it left behind could reshape a life forever. And Gabriel Sorensen, the man who once believed fortune was everything, found himself yearning not for the next business conquest, but for dawn to bring hope, and the chance to see where this unexpected connection might lead. Yet the clouds outside still hung heavy, and tomorrow's sky remained an enigma. With one last look at the restless pines, Gabriel returned to the living room, determined to keep watch over Sophie's rest and guard the promise he'd made, that she wasn't alone. Not anymore. A soft pre-dawn light seeped through the windows, casting the lodge's interior in a washed-out gray. Outside, the rain had at last dwindled to a quiet patter that occasionally gusted against the shutters. The forest lay in a heavy hush, like it too was exhausted by the storm's long, unyielding siege. Gabriel roused from a fitful sleep on the armchair he'd dragged into the living room to stay near Sophie. He blinked blearily, disoriented by the unfamiliar space, then remembered the events of the previous day. The endless rain, the power flickers, the snug dinner by the fire, and Sophie eventually succumbing to sleep on the sofa. His attention snapped to her. She was still wrapped in blankets, chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm that indicated she was, for the moment, resting peacefully. A wave of relief rolled through him. He'd worried throughout the night that her cramps might return or that some emergency would arise. Quietly he stood, rolling his neck to relieve the stiffness. Pale light filtered through the tall windows, revealing the receding gloom of the forest outside. The storm's grip seemed to have loosened. Large puddles shimmered among fallen branches, and fog clung to the pines, but at least there was no violent wind or thunder in the distance. He crossed to Sophie, noticing how her features relaxed in slumber. Even so, faint lines of worry lingered near her eyes, a testament to the stresses and uncertainties still looming. Gabriel kneeled briefly at the couch's edge, gently checking the warmth of her forehead with the back of his hand. No fever. Her breathing was steady. Reassured, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. In that moment, he felt a surge of something deeper than mere concern, an odd tenderness that sparked a longing to protect and nurture. The feeling was new, unsettling, and yet profoundly right. He forced himself to stand, not wanting to disturb her rest, and padded softly toward the foyer. Charles was there, shrugging on a raincoat and tucking a flashlight into one pocket. The caretaker's eyes, though tired, lit with a subdued optimism as he caught sight of Gabriel. "Morning, sir," he whispered. "I was just about to see if the roads are finally passable. The rain's light enough that we might have a chance at clearing some debris." Gabriel nodded, pulse quickening. "That's good news. If the route is open, we should get Sophie out to a doctor as soon as possible, even if it's just a small clinic in the nearest town." Charles tilted his head. "Agreed. Let me go check. If it's safe, I'll come back right away and we can pack up the Jeep. Could be that we only get a window of decent weather before another wave of rain hits." Without further delay, the caretaker headed outside, stepping carefully over slick tiles on the lodge's broad porch. Gabriel watched him disappear into the mist, feeling a coiled tension in his gut. Was this the breakthrough they'd been waiting for, or another false hope? Returning to the living room, he found Sophie stirring. She blinked, trying to orient herself, then attempted to sit up, pressing a hand against her belly. Gabriel rushed over, helping her ease upright. She offered him a weary but genuine smile. "Morning," she murmured. "Didn't mean to sleep so heavily." He shook his head. "You needed it. How do you feel?" She paused, scanning her body's cues. "Not terrible. Still some backache, but no sharp cramps. And I actually feel rested for the first time in, well, a while." "That's a relief," he said quietly, observing the slight relaxation in her posture. "Charles just left to check the roads. If they're clear enough, we'll head out and find you proper medical care." Her eyes brightened, though uncertainty remained. "That would be wonderful. I'm so ready to not be stranded." Her gaze flicked around the grand living room, the half-burned logs in the fireplace, and the idle furniture draped in leftover blankets. "As comfortable as this place is, it's not exactly where I imagined spending multiple days." Gabriel chuckled softly. "It wasn't my plan either." Then his expression turned more serious. "But I'm grateful for the chance it gave us to cross paths." A shadow of emotion crossed her face. She swallowed and lowered her eyes, then looked back up. "Me too," she said simply, the sincerity of her words echoing in the hush. They shared a moment of companionable silence, broken only by the last drip of water from the eaves outside. Then Sophie cleared her throat, shifting on the couch. "Do you think we should pack? Or wait until Charles is sure?" "Better to be prepared," Gabriel replied gently. "But take it easy. I can handle most of the gathering. You just rest and keep me posted if the cramps come back." She nodded, though a flicker of worry crossed her features. And what if the roads aren't passable after all? This storm seems to have a mind of its own. He exhaled, trying to mask his own concern. "Then we'll adapt, just like we've been doing. But let's hope for the best." Slowly, she rose from the sofa, leaning on his offered arm to steady herself. Together, they climbed the stairs to the suite where she'd been staying. He rummaged through the closets and drawers, retrieving any items she'd used, a robe, towels, the spare clothes he'd managed to find that might fit her. Sophie, for her part, carefully folded the few things that were truly hers: her worn coat, her small purse with personal documents. It was painfully little, Gabriel noted, a stark reminder of how few possessions she had left in the world. "Were you able to get anything from your car before it broke down?" he asked gently, noticing her meager belongings. She shook her head. "Almost nothing. I grabbed a couple personal items, but I left everything else behind, planning to come back once I found help." A faint tremor undermined her attempt to sound casual. "I doubt the car is salvageable now, especially after all this storm." Gabriel didn't press. He sensed how raw the topic was, how losing even those minor possessions weighed on her. Instead, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She offered him a grateful look, then turned away to hide the tears threatening to form. They ventured back downstairs with her small bag. Gabriel insisted she wait in the living room while he made a quick check of the kitchen. If they were leaving, he wanted to ensure the generator was shut down properly and any perishable food was disposed of or secured. The caretaker's living quarters, on the opposite wing, were still locked up. He'd likely want to accompany them or remain to oversee the lodge's caretaker duties. In truth, Gabriel didn't plan to close up the lodge for good. They might return if no hospital was immediately reachable, but they should be ready for any eventuality. Time crawled as they waited for Charles. Sophie settled by the windows again, arms folded around her middle. Gabriel hovered close, trying not to pace, though a restless energy coursed through him. The tension snapped when they heard the low hum of an engine pulling into the circular driveway outside. Almost simultaneously, the lodge's front door opened, letting in a swirl of cool, damp air. Charles entered, cheeks ruddy, boots caked in fresh mud. He pulled off his rain-dappled hood. "Well," he began, voice rough from the cold air, "I managed to get further than last time. Some of the water's receded and the fallen branches aren't as bad. There's a partial mudslide near the main highway, but if we're careful, the Jeep should handle it." Sophie let out a breath of relief, and Gabriel nodded, tension draining from his shoulders. "That's excellent. We'll drive slowly, but let's do it. The sooner we get Sophie checked by a doctor, the better." The caretaker agreed, then looked at Sophie with warm concern. "Are you up for the drive, miss? It won't be smooth. Some spots are still flooded or slick." She pressed a hand over her belly. "I'll manage. Anything to get real medical care." That determination in her voice spurred them all into action. Gabriel loaded their meager baggage into the Jeep's back seat. He also stowed a first aid kit, blankets, and water, just in case. Charles made a quick circuit of the lodge, ensuring the windows were locked and the fireplace extinguished. Within 20 minutes, they were all assembled by the front entrance. Sophie stood at the threshold, glancing back at the opulent foyer and the broad staircase leading to the quiet upper halls. Her eyes skimmed the stilled grandeur of the lodge, as though she were memorizing the space where she had found both refuge and unforeseen connection. Gabriel laid a hand on her elbow, guiding her gently toward the waiting vehicle. In the overcast daylight, she could see how saturated the grounds were, a mosaic of puddles reflecting the somber sky. Carefully, Gabriel helped her into the passenger seat, adjusting the seatbelt around her belly. She gave him a tight smile, a flicker of anxiety shadowing her expression. "I'm okay," she murmured, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her nerves. He nodded, then hopped into the driver's seat. Charles would follow in a second vehicle, or so they planned, but the caretaker paused, leaning in through the rolled-down window, brows furrowed. "Sir, with the mudslide near the highway, it might be best if we all go in one vehicle. Less risk. I can wait here or I can accompany you, but your Jeep has the better four-wheel capabilities." Gabriel weighed the options, glancing at Sophie's uneasy posture. "Come with us," he decided. "I'd feel better having you along in case we need your know-how. We'll return for the lodge once Sophie is safe." Charles nodded, quickly locking the doors behind them and jogging to climb into the Jeep's rear seat. With that, Gabriel eased the vehicle forward, tires sloshing through the slick gravel driveway. The gate creaked as it opened. The caretaker had left it partly unlatched earlier to expedite their departure. As they pulled away, the lodge receded in the rearview mirror, its tall silhouette half shrouded by the mist. Sophie twisted in her seat for a final glimpse, a pensive look on her face. Gabriel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, mindful of every bump and slick patch. Mud splattered the sides of the Jeep, and the forest enveloped them with glistening branches. The road wove through stands of pine, the path slushy from days of torrential downpour. Minutes ticked by in tense silence, the only sounds the Jeep's engine, the slosh of water under the tires, and Sophie's occasional sharp intake of breath whenever they hit a rough patch. Gabriel kept the speed low, heart pounding every time the road dipped or slid. Charles peered out the windows, giving soft warnings about upcoming turns or areas where the land might have shifted. Eventually, they reached a bend where a small landslide had spilled dirt and rocks onto the asphalt. Gabriel slowed to a crawl, carefully maneuvering the Jeep around the debris. The vehicle tilted precariously for a heartbeat, muddy water swirling at the wheels. Sophie gripped the seat, biting her lip to stifle a whimper. Charles gave instructions from the back, and Gabriel followed them with painstaking caution. At last, the Jeep bumped back onto firmer ground. "Almost past the worst part," Charles breathed, wiping sweat from his brow even in the chill. "Once we connect to the main highway, hopefully the county's done some clearing." Sure enough, a few hundred yards further, they emerged onto a slightly larger road. While still wet and strewn with fallen branches, it was far more navigable. Gabriel let out a shaky exhale. "Looks like we'll make it." Sophie closed her eyes in silent relief, though she kept a hand clutched around the handle. "I can't believe we're actually getting out," she whispered, half to herself. Charles, glancing at the gloom of the sky, piped up. "We should see if the local town clinic is open. It's about 20 miles ahead. If we keep steady, we can make it in half an hour." A knot in Gabriel's chest loosened. He reached for Sophie's hand, resting on the center console, and brushed it with his fingertips. "Hang in there," he murmured. "We'll get you checked out soon." She squeezed his fingers, the gratitude in her eyes unmistakable. Then her brow furrowed. "Gabriel, thank you. Whatever happens next, I can never repay you." His gaze remained fixed on the road, but a tender edge laced his voice. "It's not about repayment. We made it through the storm together. That's what matters." They continued along the wet highway, each passing mile a step toward rejoining the world that had felt so distant. Rain pelted the windshield, though now it was just a steady drizzle rather than the violent sheets of before. The tension in the Jeep was palpable, but hope kindled with every sign they spotted indicating proximity to the nearest town. For Sophie, the lodge was already etched in her memory, a place of safety and an unexpected bond. For Gabriel, it had become the turning point in a life that once seemed singularly defined by corporate triumphs. As they navigated each slick turn, neither spoke of their feelings aloud. But in the hush of the cabin, words seemed superfluous. They both knew something had shifted irrevocably. When the outlines of small buildings and gas stations began to appear through the fog, Sophie let out an involuntary gasp. "Civilization," she murmured. Even a tiny rural outpost looked like salvation. Gabriel slowed down, scanning for signs directing them to the clinic or a hospital. "Keep an eye out," he told Charles. "There," Charles said, pointing toward a faded sign that read, "Pineview Medical Clinic, 2 miles." A wave of relief crashed over them. As the Jeep continued forward, Sophie fought back tears. Gabriel, sensing the storm of emotions raging in her, gently reached for her hand again. She clung to him with trembling fingers, grateful and terrified all at once. The grand question of what came next hung in the air. Would the clinic confirm that everything was fine, or would new challenges emerge? Yet for the first time in days, they had the promise of professional care, and beyond that, the quiet strength of a bond forged in adversity. The lodge and the tempest it held had tested them. Now, on the cusp of re-entering the broader world, they both hoped that the intangible thread connecting them wouldn't sever once they stepped away from that secluded sanctuary. With the clinic's sign looming ahead, Gabriel steeled himself. Whatever happened, he wouldn't walk away from Sophie's life, not after everything they'd endured together. The Jeep rolled into the small parking lot of Pineview Medical Clinic, tires crunching on wet gravel. Dawn's light was still faint, casting the small building in hues of pale gold and washed-out gray. Sophie peered through the windshield, heart pounding as Gabriel eased the vehicle to a halt beneath a modest awning. They were finally here, some semblance of real medical help, the end to endless storms and unanswered questions. Charles hopped out first, pushing aside the hood of his raincoat. He waved to a middle-aged nurse who stepped outside, curiosity and concern evident on her face. Gabriel turned in his seat and squeezed Sophie's hand gently. "Ready?" She nodded, swallowing against the nerves dancing in her stomach. "Yeah, let's do it." He slid out of the driver's side, then hurried around to open her door. Even in the watery daylight, the building's chipped paint and dated sign looked welcoming after days of isolation. Sophie gripped Gabriel's arm, carefully stepping onto the glistening pavement. A chill breeze tickled across her cheeks, though a faint sun streaking the horizon promised better weather. Inside, the clinic was small and sparse. A single waiting area with plastic chairs, a few potted plants, and pale walls that carried the faint antiseptic scent of alcohol wipes and disinfectant. The nurse who'd appeared outside guided them through a short corridor leading to an exam room. Another medical staffer joined them, and soon Sophie found herself seated on a padded table, a blood pressure cuff on her arm and a stethoscope at her chest. Gabriel hovered near the door, arms crossed protectively over his chest. He tried to appear calm, but couldn't hide the tension in his posture. Charles stood back quietly, giving them space, though he cast watchful glances every so often. A doctor in a crisp white coat appeared, introducing herself as Dr. Ramirez. She was a petite woman with keen eyes and a reassuring smile. "All right, miss. Sophie, is it?" she asked, consulting a hastily filled-out intake form. "Yes, Sophie Clark," she said softly. "Could you tell me about your pregnancy? How far along you are? Any complications you've had so far?" Sophie hesitated, glancing at Gabriel. Then she laid out her situation. The approximate weeks, the infrequent prenatal care since losing her job, the intense storm fiasco, and the cramp she'd endured over the past couple of nights. As she spoke, a shiver ran down her spine, partly from leftover anxiety, partly from the lingering chill. Dr. Ramirez listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. "We'll run a quick ultrasound," she said gently, "and do some routine checks to be safe. Your blood pressure is a bit elevated, but that might be from stress and exhaustion. Let's see how the baby's doing." Another nurse helped Sophie lie back on the exam table. Gabriel found himself clinging to the edge of the room, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. He caught Sophie's eye, and her faint, nervous smile told him everything. She was scared, hopeful, and desperate for good news. Dr. Ramirez applied cool gel to Sophie's abdomen and guided the ultrasound wand. The small monitor flickered to life, revealing grainy, shadowy shapes. Sophie's heart thumped wildly in her chest. Then came the rhythmic whoosh-whoosh, softer than a whisper, but unmistakable, a heartbeat. She let out a teary laugh, relief flooding her. Gabriel inhaled sharply, exhaling only when he saw the corners of Dr. Ramirez's mouth curve into a faint smile. "There's the baby," the doctor said, voice warm. "Good heartbeat. Measurements look reasonable for your gestational stage. I don't see signs of labor or immediate distress, though your uterus was probably irritated by the stress, like false contractions. Still, we'll run blood tests just to be certain there's no infection or other complications. Sophie's eyes burned with tears. She grabbed Gabriel's hand. He had moved closer without even realizing it, and squeezed hard. "So, the baby's okay?" she asked, voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez nodded, wiping the wand clean. "Seems fine, dear. You need rest, hydration, and follow-up prenatal care. I recommend staying nearby for a couple days. Keep an eye on those cramps, watch your blood pressure. But yes, overall, you're stable. Thank goodness you came in." Gabriel felt his chest loosen, as though an invisible band had been cut. "Thank you, doctor," he managed, voice thick. She gave him a kind look. "Glad to help. Now, we don't have a large maternity ward here. This is a rural clinic. But we can do basic checks, provide you with vitamins, and arrange a consult with a more equipped hospital if needed. Pineview might not be 5-star, but we won't let you slip through the cracks." For the next hour, Sophie underwent blood tests and a simple exam to confirm her vitals. Gabriel paced the hallway with Charles, each minute feeling like it stretched. Once the results returned with no major red flags, Dr. Ramirez released her with instructions: minimal stress, light activity, and a swift plan to register at a proper prenatal facility in a nearby city if possible. They congregated in the waiting area where a stack of old magazines was strewn across chipped tables. Sophie clutched a small bag of prescribed supplements and pamphlets, relief shining in her eyes. "So I'm not on the brink of giving birth?" Dr. Ramirez smiled. "Doesn't look like it, but do not ignore any strong cramps or bleeding. Understood?" Nodding fervently, Sophie thanked her. With that, they stepped outside, greeted by a patch of sky that was far less gray than it had been for days. The rain had calmed to a mist, and in the east, a tentative sunrise broke through, painting clouds in weak pinks and golds. They stood by the jeep, letting the morning air brush over them. Charles discreetly moved to the driver's side, clearing his throat. "I'll check if the main roads into town are fully open. If you want to stay here in Pineview for a bit, there's a small motel near the grocery store." Gabriel looked to Sophie. "You should rest somewhere safe, with easy access to a pharmacy or a bigger hospital if anything changes." She nodded, placing a hand on her bag of supplies. "Yes, that'd be wise." Charles slid into the jeep, turning the ignition to check the fuel gauge. "I'll scout the motel and see if they have a vacancy. I won't be long." Gabriel and Sophie exchanged a glance as the caretaker pulled away. A hush fell between them. Then she let out a breath, tears brimming again. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "A few days ago I was out in that storm, worried I'd lose everything. Now the baby's okay, and I have a real chance." He stepped closer, tentatively covering her hand where it clutched the pamphlets. "You do," he said, eyes gentle. "And it doesn't have to end here. I meant what I said. I want to help you find stability. That might mean a job, a place to stay, or whatever you're comfortable with." She stared at him, vulnerability warring with gratitude. "But why would you? I'm just Sophie." He cut in softly. "You're not just anything. You are resilient and brave. And He paused, the confession catching in his throat. "I've spent years building an empire but never learned to truly connect. You've shown me there's more than profits and acquisitions. I don't want to just walk away." Her breath caught. A flush rose in her cheeks. I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared to rely on someone who could vanish. People have let me down before." He nodded, heart aching at the rawness of her fear. "I understand. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise I won't abandon you. We can take it slowly. Let's start with making sure you're safe, healthy, and have a roof over your head." He ventured a small, hopeful smile. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life, and your baby's life too." Tears spilled down her cheeks, mingling with a shaky laugh. She wiped them away, gaze never leaving his. "I think I'd like that," she whispered. "But I also want to stand on my own 2 feet. I don't want pity or to be your responsibility." "It's not pity," he insisted, voice quivering with earnestness. "It's a choice, one I've never been surer of." They stood there, the faint sun warming the damp air, gazing at each other with a mixture of relief and cautious hope. The hush felt sacred, as if the battered sky itself was blessing a new beginning. Soon Charles returned, Jeep engine idling. He reported that the local motel had a couple of rooms available. "It's modest but clean," he said. "They'll let you stay as long as you need." Sophie hugged the bag of supplements to her chest, turning to Gabriel. She bit her lip, a question in her eyes. Are you going to stay with me? Or do you need to go back to your other life?" In that moment, Gabriel pictured the towering skyscrapers, the endless meetings, the phone calls and contracts, and he felt no pull to rush back. He slid an arm around her shoulders, careful not to overstep boundaries. "I can afford to postpone my other life for a bit," he said gently, "if that's okay with you." She let out a trembling laugh, nodding. "Yes, it's more than okay." Together they climbed into the Jeep, driving the short distance to the motel. The roadside was littered with branches and debris from the storm, but the sky itself seemed on the mend. Hints of pale blue peeked through drifting clouds. Sophie gazed out the window, mind spinning with possibilities. Scared, yes, but for once, seeing a glimmer of a future that didn't involve endless running. The motel was a simple affair, a single row of rooms, weathered siding, a flickering neon sign proclaiming vacancy. Gabriel helped arrange a room, paying for a week up front without fanfare. The caretaker, content they were safely housed, prepared to return to the lodge, leaving them with instructions on how to contact him if needed. When they were finally alone in the modest motel room, white walls, floral bedspread, the faint hum of an outdated air conditioner, Sophie sank onto the bed, letting out a shaking breath. Her eyes roamed the small space, taking in the single table, a worn chair, and a television that looked decades old. Yet it felt like a palace, because it was safe. Gabriel set her bag on a nearby dresser. "We'll get you something to eat soon," he promised. "And the clinic's only a few minutes away. If anything flares up, we go straight there." She nodded, then looked up at him. The magnitude of the last few days shimmered between them. An entire lifetime's worth of turmoil condensed into a storm-battered rescue, a tenuous bond forged against nature's wrath. Tentatively, she reached for his hand. "I'm not sure what comes next," she whispered, "but I trust you." His chest tightened, eyes stinging with unspoken emotion. "We'll figure it out together," he said softly, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "No more storms, only calmer skies ahead." She smiled, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes, and for the first time in forever, Sophie felt more than hope. She felt the stirring of genuine faith in a future that might allow her to breathe, to love, to welcome her child into a life not defined by struggle alone. As the day wore on, they ventured out briefly for groceries, Gabriel insisting on picking up healthy options for her pregnancy. In the motel's tiny kitchenette, he helped her settle in, mindful of her every need. He found a second chair so they could eat dinner without one of them perched awkwardly on the bed. They laughed at how domestic it felt, two near strangers thrown together by fate and weather. But were they really strangers anymore? By nightfall, they'd shared stories of childhood heartbreaks and lost aspirations. They'd faced the edges of each other's fears, forging a closeness that defied the short timeline. Now, snug in that modest room, they stood side by side, glancing out the window at a sky that was no longer tempest-torn, but dusted with a few timid stars. In that peaceful hush, Sophie laid a hand on her belly, sensing another gentle flutter within. The baby seemed calm, no ominous cramps, no sign of early labor. Gabriel noticed her gesture, offered a tender smile, and folded his hand over hers, feeling the quiet miracle stirring under her skin. They exchanged no grand declarations. Words felt too small for the complexity of what bound them. Instead, they let the hush speak for them, a hush in which a new dawn of possibility glimmered. The storms that had tried to tear them apart had instead led them to this unlikely juncture, where a pregnant woman on the brink and a man once blinded by wealth stood on the threshold of genuine connection. Tomorrow, there would be phone calls to schedule further prenatal checkups, discussions about Sophie's longer-term housing, and inevitable steps toward weaving their lives together in a world beyond the battered lodge. But tonight, they savored the simple truth that they'd weathered life's fiercest storms, both literal and metaphorical, and come out hand in hand, hearts awakened to a future neither had dared imagine. And so, in the unassuming glow of a lone motel lamp, they embraced their shared uncertainty, letting hope guide them toward the promise of tomorrow, together. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen